Hi friends, welcome to the final part of the Cinderella dress construction series. In this video, we are going to be making the bodice, so let's just jump right into it. Well, I guess I should also mention that this bodice gave me so much trouble, and you'll see why. First, start with a mock-up. The first mock-up was okay, but it was cut a little bit too short. So the second mock-up was longer, and I loved the front of it, so I just needed to tweak the back because it was a bit loose. Alright, so here is the third draft of the bodice, and I'm pretty happy with it. I have inched it down to a very comfortable, flattering fit. Of course it isn't perfect because it doesn't have bones and it's not cut on the bias, so there's like a couple wrinkles, but that will be fixed and I'll get into that later. But here is the third mock-up. I should mention it's important that you have your bodice pattern match the shape of your corset so that you still keep the right silhouette. Next, I picked apart my bodice and traced onto pattern paper. You also want to make a 45-degree angle mark on both sides of your pattern so that you can cut your pattern on the bias. Cutting on the bias is very nice because it gives your fabric some stretch and makes the garment more smooth and flattering. However, it's tricky because the fabric will distort if you move it around too much. Then I traced my pattern onto a cotton lining, and it's also important that each seam of your bias cut fabric is on a different 45-degree angle, because when you sew them together it keeps the garment from distorting when you are ready to wear it. And while I was cutting out those pieces, I cut out some bias tape strips that were 1 inch wide to use for my boning channels. Now when working with bias cut fabric, it's very important that you are careful not to move your fabric around too much because your pattern can shape and distort its shape. So to prevent that, you just want to make sure that you're not moving it around too much or stretching it too much. And make sure that you have your pattern marked out with tailor's chalk or a stay stitch. I'm going to also do a stay stitch because that helps better. You want to do a stay stitch just around these lines. And don't let it hang from your dress form or from a hanger while you're working on it, unless it's right before you're hemming the garment, but we'll get to that in a bit. You just want to make sure that your patterns stay nice and neat and right where they're supposed to be, which is why I'm starting with the lining and not the actual fashion fabric of the bodice, just so that I can get some practice, so if something happens to the lining, no one will see it. But yes, so just be very careful. So I stay stitched my pattern pieces, and next we are going to seam together our bodice. Now because our fabric is stretching, it is also important that our stitches are stretching. So make sure that you use a very narrow zigzag stitch so that over time, as the fabric settles naturally, the stitch will have some ease to it. Once that's done, press your seams open, and when you press, only set your iron down. Don't move it around or it may distort. Okay, so here is a reminder why you should never zone out while you're sewing, especially when you're sewing a very nicely tailored garment. So I cut out double the pieces for this bodice because I needed one for the lining and then one to layer the rest of my fabric on with the organzas. And so I finished the lining that I was putting, gonna put the bones in. And I thought, might as well sew together the other one along with it. But then I just remembered that I need to attach all the organzas to this one, so I should have basted the organza to these layers before piecing it together. So, wish me luck while I unpick all of these tiny zigzag stitches. While I unpick that, I will treat you to the boning I cut out and put in my bodice. I put bones on all of my seams, and a few bones on top of each panel, and I didn't really have a specific way of deciding where to put bones, I just put them wherever I felt necessary. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I finish the edges of my bones. Now, if you're not comfortable with this method, because it can be a little scary if you're new at it, you can use a file, but for this particular boning, it's got this like woven pattern, I guess, because this is sew-through boning. And if you file it, it will tend to shred. So I prefer to finish my boning ends with a candle. And it's really easy. You just light the candle, and this is a pretty old candle, so it's not very pretty, but you're just going to take your boning end and then gently hover above the flame, and you'll see it start to work when the ends curl up. I hope it can focus. But yes, it will just melt the ends together within a few seconds. So I like this method because it's really quick and easy. Now the boning can catch on fire if you're not being too careful, so just make sure that you're not getting it too close to the flame. But that is pretty much how you do that. And then when you're done, you just blow out the candle. And if you have boning that is of different lengths, you want to make sure you keep all those different sizes together just to make sure you don't get mixed up. Next, I attached my boning channels. Okay, so I am here to bring you another helpful piece of advice, and that is, before you sew on your boning channels, you might want to try on your bodice and fit it one more time, because I think I put too much trust in my mock-up, and I don't know if it was due to the bias cut fabric moving around and stretching a little bit, or if it's because I added too much seam allowance. But this is, I tried this on right after sewing on my boning channels, and it was a little bit too large for my liking, so I'm gonna have to be doing some more unpicking. I bet I'm a pro at it by now, but I don't have to unpick everything. I just need to unpick all the boning channels that I have sewed on top of the seams, and then I need to just refit those seams until they fit my body, and then re-sew the boning channels back on to the bodice. So yes, make sure you do another fitting, because fabric stretches and settles, and yep, learn from my mistakes. And once that was over, I put my bones into my bodice. You'll notice that I'm wearing my corset again, because I finally got it through my own head that I need to do more fittings. Next, I cut out my bodice pieces from my organza. I didn't take any footage of me cutting out my organza or layering them like this. If you are confused, it's just the same. Hold on, it's not focusing. It's just the same layers that we did with the outer skirt. So we've got the iridescent, the teal, lilac, and royal blue. And I did not film it because I was stressed out, because when I was cutting my cotton out on the bias, it gave me like zero trouble. But when you cut out the organza on the bias, it will give you so much trouble with distorting, because if you just pick up the pattern piece like this, it will distort. Right now it won't, because it's attached to the cotton, so it's got some sturdiness to it. But if you just cut out your organza pieces and then pick them up, they will distort. So my number one tip for this is, when you cut out your organza, cut it out while it is pinned to your pattern paper, so that when you pick it up, it has something to grab onto, and then it won't move around too much. But yes, it took me a good several hours to get these all pinned down and placed neatly with the corresponding pattern pieces. So yes, make sure that you don't move it around too much, because the organza will give you so much trouble. And just like the pieces of the lining, I stay stitched my bodice, and then I seamed it together. And then I sewed and pressed my bodice and lining together. Next is the piping, and to do this I cut a 4-inch wide bias strip of poly silk lining, and then I cut out some cotton cord, the length of the bottom of my bodice. Switch your machine foot to a piping foot or a zipper foot, and sew that cord inside the strip of fabric. Nextly, I attached that piping to the bottom of my bodice and clipped my cord. Okay, so you know how we added this little bit here to make sure that when this overlaps, it can, overlap and not show any skin. So this is like our little couple inches of modesty panel. Well, I did not cut that off the other side should I need the extra room, because it turns out I do need this extra bit, because my original plan was to just cut this off here so that I can just overlap it like so. But because when I layered this fabric, I ended up layering a lot of fabric together, and so this bodice is a bit thicker than I originally intended. So it just needs a couple inches of ease in order to overlap now because of how thick it is. And so I ended up not cutting it off. So as you can see, this still has this little triangle bit. So I'm just going to fold this under and then fold this edge in and sew along all the way to the bottom. And yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish up this side, and I'm also going to hand sew down the lining to the piping. Then I attached my hooks and bars. Oh, why hello. I am just casually herringbone stitching some more bones into the back of my bodice, and you may be wondering how I got here in the first place. Well, so you know how I explained how I didn't cut away that extra bit of fabric at the back because I needed that because of the extra bulk of the layers of my organza? Well, as a matter of fact, those layers of organza have put me through so much trouble because they add so much bulk to this, it's not too thick, but like, they add just enough bulk to this garment to make me insane. And I have been, like, furiously trying to handle this because they've caused me so much trouble. And mainly, what happened is I have these at the back here. I have bones running near the back, which I intended to be the bones that I place near my closures, because you need that extra strength near the closures. However, because I needed that extra room in the back for this to close because of the bulk of the fabric, I don't have that structure right next to the closure, and so I sewed in my hook and eyes, and I just, expected that it would work, and then when I tried it on, I took pictures of the back of me wearing it, and it was so wrinkly, and so I desperately need these 2 extra bones in the back, so that is why I'm currently sitting on my bed, stitching these in place by hand. And what I did, I just created like a boning channel and inserted 2 more bones that I cut to size. And you may also be wondering, well, Mary, if the bulk of the organza is giving you so much trouble, why did you sew so many layers into the bodice in the first place? Well, it comes down to color, because the organza, like I mentioned, is very light and thin, but that also means the color is very thin. So when I overlaid this for my skirt, it worked perfectly because the skirt fabric needed to be very thin and light, and so did the colors. But with the skirt, it is also gathered tightly into the waistband, so you still get enough color, but you don't have as much fabric. But with the bodice, the color is laid flat because this is a structured garment. So you don't get as much color, which is why I had to layer my organza to make sure this was the right shade of blue to match the rest of my dress. Because if I just did one of each color, then it would have been a lot lighter. And to be honest, like, I experimented with this before and it just looked like pretty white when I did it the first time. I guess a better solution to this would be to have dyed my cotton blue to match, and then I wouldn't have to put as much layers on. However, I'm not very good at dyeing fabric, and I have done this before. When I made my bell bodice, I used a different shade of lining for the backing, and you may think it wouldn't be as much trouble, but for some reason that little shade was so different that it made the entire bodice look a lot more brown, a more brown shade of yellow than the yellow on the skirt. And so for the longest time, my bell bodice was a lot darker than the skirt, and it looked kind of tacky. So I eventually remade that entire bodice, mostly just because I hated the color, and secondly because I lost a little bit of weight and I wanted to make sure that it was well tailored to fit my new body shape. So yeah. Ah, much better. After yet another fiasco, I moved on to the Bertha. Now, I've already had practice making this Bertha because I had a friend commission me to add this Cinderella Bertha to one of her dresses. So I start by draping this little strip of fabric along the neckline, which we will sew the Bertha to in order to make it detachable. And I sewed this from the white cotton lining and my iridescent fabric. To make the rest of the Bertha, I cut a rectangle of fabric about 32 inches by 26 inches. And if this is your first time making this Bertha, I highly recommend a mock-up, as these measurements will change due to your size. I cut one layer of lilac and teal and 2 layers of royal blue to go on either side of the Bertha. Sew together your fabric tube and finish the edges, and then turn it inside out. This kind of looks like a Princess Aurora bodice. Well, not anymore. I think I'm finally happy with the shape of this. It's looking really good. It did take me several hours because I was trying to match up these the ruching and the pleats as close as I could to the original. You may notice that the bodice does not close in the back, and that it looks a little bit more square shaped on the dress form, but this is because the dress form is not shaped to my body wearing a corset. It's just shaped to my general body shape. So it's not as figure flattering on the dress form, but when I wear it, it looks better when it has the corset. But other than that, it looks really pretty. And the next thing we're going to do is start on the butterflies, and I'm super excited. So, when it comes to the butterflies, this is the part that I'm most excited for because we get to do fun artsy stuff. So we're doing glitter and paint and diamonds and all that wonderful stuff, and that is just my cup of tea. So what I have done is I have my sketchbook here, and I'm going to switch cameras because this one does not focus very well. And what I have done is I have just drawn up a few references of her bodice, and I've just combined all the references to get this general idea of what it looks like. And I have assigned each little butterfly on her bodice a number, and each number has a corresponding butterfly that I drew out to best match the references. And I did the same for the back as well. And then I went through and then I made them a little bit more detailed, giving them some writing out like what type of glitter I'm going to use, what color of fabric, and which ones have diamonds and which ones don't have diamonds. And so, yeah, there's just like several pages of butterflies. I looked at most of the references, and it looked like most of the butterflies were actually still just blue butterflies. There are noticeably a couple yellow ones in there, and there may or may not have been some pink ones, but I think overall it's mostly just blue and then a few yellow ones. So yeah, we'll get right into that. So I summoned all the fabric scraps from the rest of this dress project. Alright, so I just finished cutting out my butterflies, and this is what they look like. So what I've done is as you can see, I've matched them all up with a drawing of a butterfly. And what I did is I redrew the butterflies that were in my sketchbook, but I drew them to be the exact size that I wanted them to be, and marked out what kind of patterns I wanted, along with where I was going to put rhinestones and whatnot. And then what I did was I cut out the corresponding fabric colors. To make these not fray, I used fusible interfacing, which I ironed on to the middle layer of the butterfly, and I sandwiched that in between 2 more layers of fabric. So you need at least 3 layers of fabric, and they don't all have to be the same color. This one is all just royal blue fabric, but I have experimented with mixing and matching. For example, this one has some royal blue, some teal, and some iridescent fabric in the middle. So I tried to just match them as correctly as I could to the original dress. So yeah, if you don't want to do that, you can of course do whatever you want and just have fun with it. I don't remember how many butterflies I have, but I have at least 3 pages worth of butterflies. Then I proceeded to paint, glitter, and crystallize my butterflies. This was really fun to do, and I took my time to make sure each one was unique and beautiful. Some had just paint, some had just glitter, and some had wire, and some even had feathers. So I attached my butterflies according to my reference, sewing the Bertha as I went. Alright, so I just finished attaching all of my butterflies, and I really am so happy with the way it came out. The next things I need to do are to just sew some snaps to the inside of this Bertha so that I can make it detachable, and then I need to sew some hooks along the edge of the bodice so that it can attach to the skirt, and the hooks will also be sewn to the skirt back there so that it can sit neatly with the skirt. And then there's only one more alteration that I need to make, and that is I need to move all of my hooks to the edge of this fabric, because it's not that it is too tight when I wear it. The problem is that when these hooks are attached, it kind of tugs at the fabric, and this little lip here tends to show. So I'm just going to move those to the edge so that it will sit flat and not like this. I did all that hand sewing off camera so that I could have my project be portable and take it around my house to finish it wherever I liked. And now that that is finally done, I can proudly say that the bodice, along with the entire Cinderella dress, is now complete. Well, friends, I really hope you enjoyed that. I had so much fun, and I am honestly so happy with the way it turned out, and I can't wait to finish up this series. We are going to do the accessory video next, and then after that I will have the reveal video. And what else was on my notes? After that's done, I will have some small project videos, and then after that I will have my Emma project plans, which I will share with you, and I'm so excited. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye! Plans? I don't know how to speak today. Okay. But now that it's all done, I am proud to say that the Bertha and... what? Not the Bertha, I meant the bodice. But now that it's all done, I can proudly say that the bodice, and along with the entire... And I sewed this from white cotton, and I sewed... I can't do this. You mean I wasn't recording this whole time?